Okay, so I got a summary here of another work on narrativebusters.org. This one's the DNC Media's Playbook, or Everything We Can't Answer is Racist, Nazis, Alt-Right Russia, QAnon Spreads Hate, Incites Violence. This work originated as an addendum on bias to conclude the big smear and its deconstruction of the media's three meta-narratives. It soon exploded into a work of a similar length I saw fit to render as a separate essay. This writing examines the media's favoritism for Democrats, delves into the personal and professional connections between leading media people and leading Democrats, and spells out a long but hardly exhaustive listing of everything they've been wrong on. Then, most usefully of all, I reverse engineered their playbook, a feat I believe is unprecedented. Bernard Goldberg's book, Bias, details the media's imbalanced portrayal of the news. Tim Grossklose's Left Turn quantifies the effect of media bias on elections, but so far as I know, nobody else has attempted to spell out their playbook A to Z. From methodology to contingencies to linguistics. Following this, the reader will find more nuggets of political gold, including an expose of who's funding the fact-checkers that say liberals are always right, an expose on how the experts aren't any smarter than we the people, a brief overview of the bias of academia and of the tyrannical weirdos running tech companies and the biases thereof, and the machinations thereof. And finally, a brief history of cancel culture tactics which have actually existed for the entirety of the Democrat Party's dreadful history. In passing, it bears mention that this work occasionally references the three meta-narratives laid out in another work, The Big Smear, which I'll briefly summarize here. These consist of meta-narrative number 1, the race narrative, meta-narrative number 2, the Nazis narrative, and meta-narrative number 3, the free market's bad narrative. The race narrative includes demagogy about slavery, the American founding, most of U.S. history, and the magical switching parties conspiracy theory. It also involves socialism's phony claims of racial virtue, contradicted by its long record of ethnic and racial violence the world over. The Nazis narrative uses false claims that the National Socialists were right-wing and likens any effective Republicans to historical Nazis, a charge reinforced by innuendo linking these effective Republicans to neo-Nazis, complete with dire predictions that using talking points which Democrats can't rebut will incite violence by said miscreants. This narrative interlocks with practically any push to censor the internet. Last of all, the free market's bad narrative maligns free market capitalism. What the powers that be wish to replace it with can vary, as everyone from Klaus Schwab to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has their own visions and blueprints. They all agree, however, that free people running their own lives must not be tolerated. Okay, so in any case, the media gave Trump 90% negative coverage because reporters are 90% liberal, and that's not what I say. That's what they've said on surveys for years. A 2004 Pew Research Center survey discovered that 93% of journalists lean left. Pew Research Center staff values in the press. Pew Research Center, May 23, 2004. In other words, reporters claim neutrality, yet vote Democrat as fiercely as blacks. They vote the same with their dollars. 96% of journalists' contributions went to Clinton, only 3.9% to Trump. Dave Leventhal and Michael Beckel, journalists, shower Hillary Clinton with campaign cash. The Center for Public Integrity, October 17, 2016. This bias affects how others vote. Media bias affects elections and distorts our democracy. Tim Grosclose in Left Turn, 2011, found media bias boosted the Democrat vote share 8 to 10%, meaning minus the bias, we'd have no Democrat presidents since LBJ, even before accounting for decades of open borders electorate packing and generations of curriculum corruption smearing America as racist, which, minus media smokescreens, wouldn't have occurred either. Most of the bias is topic selection. Slanting the topic coverage never hurts either, but most of it is the what topics selected altogether. The media isn't just biased, but compromised by personal and professional connections to leading Democrats. For a few easy examples, Chuck Todd's wife works as a Democrat political consultant. Ben Rhodes and David Rhodes are brothers. One worked for Obama, the other ran CBS at the time. George Stephanopoulos of ABC was Bill Clinton's comms director, and Obama press secretary Jay Carney, himself from Time magazine, was married to ABC's Claire Shipman, to say nothing of the Chris Cuomo-Andrew Cuomo dilemma seen at CNN. Bias and cronyism aren't all. They also run a corrupt playbook. The exposure of the journalist listserv in 2008 revealed that calling conservatives racist was a standard narrative they deployed. Per Spencer Ackerman from the Washington Independent, quote, "If the right forces us to either defend Jeremiah Wright or tear him down, no matter what we choose, we lose the game they put upon us. Instead, take one of them, Fred Barnes, Karl Rove, who cares, and call them racists." End quote. First, notice that the press picked a side. Second, notice that the framing enemies as racist is a standard operating procedure. The journalist scandal implicated David Korn, Robert Greenwald, John Judas, Joe Klein, Paul Krugman, Jeffrey Toobin, who has since become famous for other things, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Brad DeLong, Kevin Drum, Jonathan Shade, Chris Hayes, Nate Silver, who is a total hack, Dave Weigel, and Matthew Iglesias, among many others. The exposed, corrupted individuals worked for such outlets as Air America, the American Prospect, the Brookings Institution, the Center for American Progress, CNN, Foreign Policy, which is the magazine of the Council on Foreign Relations, Harper's, The Hill, the Huffington Post, the Los Angeles Times, Media Matters, The Nation, NPR, the New America Foundation, which is the Soros-funded group that hired Nicole Hannah-Jones, the New Republic, the New York Times, the New Yorker, Newsweek, the Open Society Institute, Politico, Reuters, Slate, Time Magazine, the Washington Post, among many not insignificant others. More recently, in 2019, Dean Baquet, New York Times editor, discussed with his staff, one, the New York Times' plan to pivot from Russian collusion to framing everything in terms of race, and two, the exact methods to spin all racial matters. And look at 2020. What did the New York Times actually do? They spun everything as race, 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 race. They even crammed COVID impacts and responses into a racial frame. Nor is their chosen framing an accurate representation of the world. This establishment media said Hillary would win, that Russian collusion was real, and that Hunter's laptop was fake, and that Jussie Smollett was the victim of a real attack that Trump's rhetoric somehow incited, and that the Covington Catholic kids were a bunch of hooligans menacing a Native American elder. Talk about an expensive mistake. The same people who told us to take Michael Avenatti seriously, for crying out loud. And on and on and on it goes, detailing the stuff the DNC media got wrong, and I mean unambiguously wrong, for the last 10 years, plus famous cases like Walter Duranty denying Stalin killed Ukrainians. By the way, the New York Times has yet to return the Pulitzer they got for that one. In any case, the list of lies, just the non-technical, uncontestable lies, goes on in my work for about 7 uninterrupted pages. And that's just the ones that could be easily proven and weren't so technical it took more than 2 sentences to explain. This all leads into the Playbook, the section, the Playbook, starts at about page 21, 22, 23 in the PDF version, something like that. They explain how the DNC media, of course that might be bumped back, I'm going to tweak the menu. I got complaints about the first bunch for a table of contents that's confusing, so I'm going to, but yeah. Any case, it's old... I mean, it'll add a length to the table of contents, but I can't imagine it'll be pushed back beyond maybe page 27. Anyway, it is all leading to the Playbook, how the media does it. The narrative pushers will dismiss this as a conspiracy theory, but can a conspiracy theory predict future behavior? No, actual conspiracy theories have to be constantly retconned into working, whereas the media Playbook I wrote accurately predicts what the DNC media will do next. We'll summarize this. The work itself has far more detail. Some of this will be old news to the better read among you. But most of this is careful reverse engineering of how they operate, what cards they play, and in what order. We'll start with what you know already. They push predetermined narratives and make it seem plausible by making it omniscient in print, on TV, laundered into fictional shows, reinforced in comedy shows, etc. The networks cover the same stories at the exact same time with identical linguistics. Bombshell, it's the beginning of the end. We've reached a tipping point. The walls are closing in. The overarching meta-narratives are chosen not by polls, but by what would help Democrats the most if the public were to come to believe it was true about Republicans. Old hotness, Republicans hate workers. New hotness, Republicans are racist. These serve as anchoring beliefs, poisoning the well against later truth bombs. The DNC media also relentlessly predicts rare, vivid incidents because of the other side's rhetoric or tone, which will be pounced on, as these rare, essentially random events are bound to happen periodically and organically. Republicans are tied to bad things with innuendo questions. For example, repeatedly asking, will you disavow David Duke, plants the idea there's something to disavow. Few of these silly fake stories track to specific times of the year, but fake October surprises do. The fake October surprises often match the campaign theme of the Democrats that year. More on this later. But except for these election year stunts, most of the other events are basically crammed into the three aforementioned meta-narratives, to wit, the race narrative, the Nazis narrative, and the free market's bad narrative. The DNC press sidesteps debating ideas through the use of various shenanigans. The first is incidentizing, whereby two feuding avatars of their causes are framed as the story. The he said, she said of it, drowning out the philosophical substance of the debate. If ideas are discussed, the left loses because their ideas fail. Another method of incidentizing is the old anonymous liberal in government says trick. Other methods include pulling a Covington, which is using decontexted video, taking some conservative's conclusion but omitting the supporting reasoning and then gawking at it. They do that one to Tucker Carlson a lot. And especially on TV, running impact stories about how the mean, no good, nasty Republicans proving this photogenic fake victim Democrat wrong is causing them some vaguely defined harm. Most obnoxiously of all, there is soundbiting, aka narrativing the quotes, aka quote raping, aka pulling a Charlottesville, whereby someone's words are butchered so badly it may as well have been a hoax. The second DNC issue sidestepping trick is identitizing, or the introduction of race or gender as a substitute fake issue in order to, again, avoid the philosophical substance of the debate. This game of hide behind race because they got no case conflates deviant, malicious behavior and objections to it with identity, thus delivering an implied ultimatum to bully the target into silence. This pairs with 1. Slapping the civil rights label on non-civil rights issues, and 2. The deployment of weaponized therapy language to screech about harm and trauma if anyone gainsays them. It aims to take arguments over what is true and replace them with fights over who is true. The next trick, scandalizing, sidesteps issues as well. This consists of painting ordinary actions as corrupt, of blowing smoke and shouting fire. These spin scandals, these drama scandals, take generic situations and creatively interpret them into being scandals, such as pretending ordinary levels of White House turnover indicated a Trump administration in chaos, pretending that criticism of court rulings amounted to a constitutional crisis, or pretending that finding out Hunter Biden cashed in at Burisma was somehow a Trump-Ukraine scandal. Other scandalizing tricks include the paid parade of fake accusers, such as the dozen women who falsely accused Trump of groping them 1 month before an election, before vanishing the day after the election. In contrast, none of the women accusing Bill Clinton appeared 1 month before an election or vanished the day after. The tactics of scandalizing also include declaring certain events between 2019 and 2021 off limits for respectable discussion. I don't pretend to know what happened, but I've never heard of anything so dangerous it couldn't be talked about. Scandalizing depends on conflation, as does the other tactic that's related to it, criminalizing. The next tactic, there we go, that of criminalizing, paints effective opposition as criminal, although they ignore real crime, I might add, by inventing spin crimes, and only effective opposition is ever a crime. Funny how that works. For example, the TV lawyers said for years that pointing out the crooked origins of the collusion investigation was obstruction that Robert Mueller should prosecute. Likewise, anything written between 2015 and 2021 about the emoluments clause. Likewise, the substitute fake story that it was a crime to discover Hunter Biden was cashing in at Burisma. A common flaw of criminalizing as a DNC media tactic is the constant lack of anything beyond televised drama testimony in backing it up. It's never been easier to covertly record someone, and yet they never have recordings to prove any of these claims. Failing all of the above, the DNC media will then turn to hoax stories, which can be easily identified. The presence of a suddenly widespread headline supported by nothing but anonymous sources say indicates the launch of an astroturfed hoax story. These are basically establishment conspiracy theories and include such hits as Russian collusion, Covington Catholic, or Dan Rather's supposed George Bush National Guard papers. Most hoax stories connect to the three meta-narratives, but not necessarily so. Consider the fake October surprises. These track to the chosen theme of the Democrat candidate's campaign, Bush had his drunk driving incident drug out last minute, as his 2000 campaign hinged on religious voters. The Dan Rather/CBS fake National Guard papers sought to discredit a George Bush who built his campaign on being pro-Iraq war. Mitt Romney's 47% comment, while a real statement, was highlighted all out of proportion to its actual importance, against a backdrop of painting him as rich and aloof to working-class suffering amid a recession. The paid parade of fake sexual assault accusers targeted Trump as the media decided the first woman president was the campaign theme. Needless to say, don't believe anything in October without receipts, and testimony alone is not receipts. The DNC press also creates recurring categories of hoaxes to rerun the same scams ad nauseum by trope manufacturing, by concocting recurring tropes, stock characters, and stock events, connecting unrelated dots and shoehorning them into not just a story, but the story. The key feature here is naming the imaginary patterns of narrative reinforcer events so that viewers can say, oh, there's another one, reinforcing a fantasy framework of how the world works, prompting the whipping out of phones and thus creation of further viral videos, a vicious circle. Combining this with reframing the generic as specific, we get things that are not things. Essentially, narrative-driven creative interpretations of ordinary life as racism, such as, those Karens are always calling the police, but only on black people, yet most people who call the police on black suspects are themselves black, ergo Karens are not a thing. But like the game Slugbug, once it starts, people see Volkswagen Beetles everywhere, even though the prevalence of such cars remains unchanged. The belief that reality is a social construction implies that anything activists can sell us on becomes true, thus the hoaxers aren't bothered by what they're doing. Yet the trope's falsity proves less intriguing than the method. Generic disputes over non-race issues get that generic behavior proclaimed as typical of one group and given a person's name as if a prevalent stock character. A steady stream of rare but recorded anecdotes floods social media, and despite the lack of non-circumstantial evidence of racism, the DNC media repeats it, draws sweeping conclusions, and voila, a trope. And from there, you can cut and paste your way to proving there's an epidemic of just about anything you want to say that there's an epidemic of. For example, I mean, they could just as soon take all these videos of like ordinary people flipping out over skateboarders skating and, well, places skateboarders skate and say, see, there's institutional bias against skateboarders. I mean, if politicians thought there was votes there, I'm sure they would do it that way. But I mean, they would certainly rest on much stronger basis than all this talk of those Karens are calling the police and getting unarmed black men shot by the police. I mean, that's like the ultimate thing that's not a thing. Yeah, it's take something rare. Take every single example of it, make it into a headline, and then voila, people think that rare things are common. Building on this idea, with more heavyweight topics, like police shootings or far-right domestic terrorism, we have the magnification of the rarities. This technique relies heavily on hyping the visual vividness and hiding the prevalence by releasing a smokescreen of trivial details, by recounting the greatest hits of police shootings or far-right terror, and framing a micro-problem as a microcosm that demands a sweeping response from the authorities. Such topics are constantly forced into headlines whether anything has happened or not, such as the obsessive coverage of any Patriot Front rally, and the blue-and-on liberal media then drags out experts to talk of potential violence as if it was as dire as actually happened violence, and then promotes this paranoia as a serious intelligence assessment. Their favorite trick on this is to constantly announce right-wing extremism is on the rise. Seriously, that phrase is everywhere. And they will cherry pick whatever time frame it takes to make it a rise. This rise and threat is stated in percent increase terms, seldom as raw numbers, because that illuminates how minuscule this problem is. Indeed, lightning strikes kill more Americans annually than all flavors of terrorism put together, much less far-right terror specifically. So what motivates this hyper-focus on novelty topics? Because it provides a pretext to censor the internet, something that lightning strikes could never do, hence why they don't use that as an excuse. But censor the internet of what? Of their most effective critics, of course. Effective Republican talking points always somehow incite violence because something created an atmosphere and something tone. The DNC press, needless to say, can practically never elaborate any connection between a specific GOP statement and a specific terroristic act. These vague canards about tone are the best they've got to hit effective Republicans with. Now, ineffective Republicans never incite violence. Funny how that works. Offline, effective GOP politicians are asked constantly to disavow attackers that they had nothing to do with. And the questions, of course, are asked repeatedly in order to plant the idea in the electorate's heads that the GOP had something to do with it. Similar smears target institutions the left aims to take over or dismantle, such as with the assault on Gab or BitChute or any non-establishment tech sites. Other tricks, let's see, linguistic manipulations also prove indispensable should the rest of the above fail. Repetitive deceptive label use facilitates the narrative pushing. With labels to claim, labels to blame, and labels to frame, the DNC press uses label slapping to create a fake version of how the world works, who the players are, and what the story is, to control the narrative by controlling what things are called. Most important tricks, let's see, you got the virtue word maneuver, in which some abstract or ambiguous virtue buzzword like democracy or institutions or responsible or decency or education is claimed by the DNC media, which then launders their own ideological propositions into said virtue buzzword and claims anyone opposed to those ideological propositions is really opposed to that buzzword, leading to narratives that the GOP opposes democracy rather than just disagrees on policy. It works in tandem with the smear word maneuver, where the DNC media relentlessly slaps the DNC's enemies with post hoc label, their criteria never explained in advance. Labels like extremism or racism or bigotry or harm or hate speech, etc. Indeed, not only are the post hoc labels never defined in advance, the words themselves are deliberately chosen for their ambiguity and stretchability in order to shift the Overton window forever leftward. Deceptive labels also slant the description of actions. For example, disputing the Democrats becomes denying. Red pilling becomes radicalization, and exposing left-wingers plotting in secrecy becomes spreading hate or demonizing, if not hate speech, whatever that means. Label slapping also distorts history, such as how old segregationist Southern Democrats who voted for the New Deal are nevertheless characterized without evidence as being conservatives. The real purpose of slanting history, of course, is to invent imaginary continuity between the GOP and past evils. This slanted language being everywhere, omnipresent, used in tandem, like I said, sort of like the earlier, the walls are closing in, that we've reached a tipping point, how that all is in coordination. The slanted vocabulary they're all using, like they're using our dictionary, but they're not using our vocabulary, or it's the other way around. Whatever. The slanted language, in any case, produces liberal normativity. Where Bill Gates or George Soros funding your fact checkers is normal, but pushing back is misinformation. Where conservatives enacting policies is political, but liberals imposing DEI on your workplace is normative. Where liberal teachers unions teaching your kids to hate this country is education, but then seeing a few YouTube videos and realizing their teachers lied to them is radicalization. Under liberal normativity, the DNC press conflates its own preferences with not just good policy or common sense, but legitimacy itself. Under liberal normativity, the far left is just slightly left, the left is the center, and anyone to their right is far right, even when the majority backs this far right. Like, for example, 52% of British people backed Brexit, yet Farage is somehow far right. Most people are not fans of open borders, yet, guarding the border is far right. Things like that. Conservative organizations are always identified as such. Numerous key liberal organizations, such as the Brennan Center, which invented the voter ID is racist conspiracy theory, somehow these groups get called nonpartisan. If you want to know how nonpartisan they are, go to their website and look up who their donors are. I mean, like Tides Foundation, Open Society Foundation, James L. Knight Foundation. I'm not sure how a nonpartisan organization gets to be funded only by liberals, but okay. Anyway, building on liberal normativity, the press uses postmodern word games of the thing A is actually thing Z variety. For example, border cheaters are called immigrants, as though jumping the border was no different than entering by the proper lawful process, as though no distinction existed between lawful and unlawful. Establishment conspiracy theorists are always described as analysts, but anti-establishment analysis is always called conspiracy theories. Riots they like are protests, but riots they don't like are insurrections, and so forth. Some liberal normative word games target specific audiences, and this is the one that's going to get me in trouble, but it's true. It's true. Just because you don't like it doesn't mean it's not true. Where's the lie? The DNC media The DNC media tilted millennial women sharply leftward by loading their stories with a flurry of non-quantifiable, emotionally loaded non-describer words like hate or bigotry or danger or unsafe or bullying or harm or compassion or empathy or inclusion or diversity. Words that are basically Trojan horse words that mean whatever Democrats later needed them to mean. This is blended with a topic selection focused on niche issues of various isms and phobias to creatively reinterpret ordinary life as oppressive to modern young women. This in turn blended with a torrent of impact-focused stories all about the establishment-approved fake victims, of course, instead of anything philosophical about, hey, what policy should we have and why. This non-philosophical approach sold the Democrats as a brand in a relational way, using a variety of single-issue funnels combined with the cultivation of ruthlessly weaponized anxiety, relieved only by voting Democrat. All of the above was achieved by the application of 100 years of advertising data. Indeed, women have long been the primary purchasers of the household and the primary target of advertisers for a very long time, hence the torrent of vague, ambiguous language designed to sell impressions, to sell feelings, to sell an aura, as opposed to selling specific philosophical propositions, because 100 years of advertising data says that's what works. This also pairs with something darker. College miseducation, plus this media bias, created a bumper crop of compassion authoritarians that imagine that disagreement with any establishment-declared victim is somehow causing some sort of vaguely defined harm that must be prevented by censoring the speech of those who are supposedly advantaged. College miseducation installed, and college miseducation installed this, and the media capitalizes on this installation of inclusion and compassion and empathy as the new content-free pseudo-morality, which replaces actual moral reasoning with one-dimensional compassion, but only for establishment-approved victims, of course, not people whose businesses BLM burned down, for example. Real victims receive no compassion and much opposition, and real reforms. Real reforms, the kind that does not enrich the DC swamp, we'll say. They don't receive contemplation, and they receive a lot of organized opposition by people who imagine that they're somehow fighting the power. They're fighting the power by doing everything the DC swamp wants. Funny how that works. Anyway, armed with these linguistic manipulations, they seek first to gather the young women and then use that to leverage the young men, and thus any following generations to buy into woke. On a similar note, there's another trick, bandwagon starters. Other bandwagon starters litter the landscape, from calling for unity, we're only divided because you won't obey, peasant, to doomcasting the future of the Republican Party by writing it off as all old people. Of course, this will only be the GOP's fate if their bandwagoning tactics successfully bandwagon younger folks away from the GOP. They're passing off the cause as the effect. Likewise, the media's influence polls, aka push polls, where they do everything from using the power of suggestion to boost Democrat prospects by a few points, to outright rigging the polls by oversampling Democrats. By the way, good luck finding polls that ever guess high on how much support Republicans have. It seems to be about 5 to 7 points oversampling Democrats. Rasmussen is better, although sometimes they're about 2 points more Republican than everything. Trafalgar is usually pretty good, although they're much better in the Rust Belt than the Sun Belt. They nailed the Virginia governor's race, though, with Youngkin. They nailed that one right down where it was. But Trafalgar, believe what they say on Michigan or Ohio before you believe what they say on Arizona. And then there was the other one that was... trying to think of there was a third one that I thought was pretty good. There's a couple I think are very bad too. Whoever CNN was using as a pollster, they had Andrew Gillum beating Ron DeSantis by 12 points in Florida. Jesus Christ, couldn't win Florida by 12 points. I don't know where they got the idea Andrew Gillum was going to. Quinnipiac is garbage. ABC Washington Post is garbage. Good heavens, they had Hillary beating Donald by 12. Or was it 10? No, but yeah, I think it was 10, but it was like 2 weeks out of the election. It's not like it was like, August or July of that year. They like 2 weaks out from the election, the ABC Washington Post had Hillary by 10 or something like that. There's a fourth one I thought was really junk. I can't remember it right now. Anyway, oh yeah, push polls. Okay, so um, push polls also interlock with whatever elite-funded social trends the DNC media is astroturfing, such as BLM or transgenderism. First comes the puff piece, then the push poll. Then they cite the push poll as proof that people are embracing the fake trend, as proof that the Overton window is organically moving, supposedly. So don't you dare start asking which DNC mega donors are funding any of this. Um, all this pairs with another trick that usually goes with well, sometimes it goes with the fake polls and sometimes it doesn't. But anecdotal human interest fake stories where isolated Republicans defecting are presented as typical in order to bandwagon mass desertions into occurring. This one used to work better than it does now. It seems to have fallen off in effectiveness ever since Orange Man appeared, which actually makes sense. Why would the GOP base voters jump ship right when they're getting a party that does everything they wanted at long last? Also, the DNC press highlights the oddballs and extremists on the Republican side to bandwagon people in the middle away from it without considering whether, are they nut picking or is there, a lot of prevalence of these oddballs on one side. They also don't want them considering whether the philosophy of the GOP would suit the watching voter in the middle better. This tactic also works to demonize ideas with their false positives sweeping branding trick. The DNC media notes that a fringe group shares a mainstream opinion and declares that the mainstream opinion is now one associated with and two now fringe. They do this a lot with topics like free speech and immigration. Some Nazi somewhere agrees with you on one thing and nothing else. Therefore, you must run away from that position because we have now declared it as a Nazi position and you may not hold it. Basically, David Duke wants the border wall. Well, so do millions of people who are not David Duke. What's your point? It's like that. Online Nazis, they oppose speech restrictions, they oppose gun restrictions. Yeah, and millions of people that are not Nazis, but you're just going to smear as Nazis also hold the same position. It's like, yeah, it's false positive sweeping branding. Other bandwagoning techniques include celebrity endorsements, creating a milieu of liberalism everywhere by laundering Democrat policies into, non-politics shows because it's easiest to sell politics as not politics. They launder Democrat narratives into things like comedy shows. For instance, you have like the likes of Trevor Noah or John Oliver. Let's quote this clip out of context and gawk at it. They'll pull like a CNN clip or MSNBC clip. So no one watches CNN, but at the same time everyone's getting the content, or at least the most slanderous of it. Let's see, where were we? Okay, so they do that. Comedy shows, comedic laundering of Democrat narratives. They tried to force them into sports, although that doesn't seem to have worked nearly as well. People like sports precisely because there's no social justice there. It's all meritocracy. They do this with crime dramas, even on occasion children's programming. And of course, children are dragged out as props. Give the school system more money or you hate children. Of course, there's experts say, which is upheld by the expert circle. Experts say the Democrats are right. Experts say the Democrats are right. Really? I'm an expert and I say the Democrats aren't right. Banned! All the experts agree the Democrats are right. Yeah, it's sort of it's a cancel-based consensus. They say it's a consensus. It's a cancel-based consensus. So children as props and experts say round out these bandwagoning tactics. If the DNC narratives lose traction and DNC policies implode, camouflaging is there to disguise the culpability. They do this when they can't bury the topic altogether but need to have the culprit rewritten out of the story. So they slide the dispute away from its focal point, such as using impact stories about the poor harassed teachers rather than tell you what nonsense they were teaching in the first place that led to the conflict in the first place. Other things they'll claim that CRT's critical race theories critics can't define it, even as they quote verbatim the offending sections from the books by Richard Delgado or Derek Bell or Ibram X. Kendi. They'll say, we're just teaching the truth about history, yet somehow I don't think they mean that they're teaching that everyone did slavery and white people ended it, or that Democrats ran slavery and Jim Crow, and that the segregation of Southern Democrats voted for whatever Woodrow Wilson wanted and voted for the New Deal, ergo they were liberals, hence why so few changed parties. Yeah, I don't think that's what they mean by teaching the truth about history. They'll blame guns rather than gangs or fatherlessness. They'll blame falling oil prices rather than socialism for the collapse of Venezuela. They'll credit Gorbachev rather than Reagan for the end of the Cold War, etc. They do this financially with economic matters too, by pretending that presidents pass budgets by themselves in order to conceal which party exploded the debt. By looking at what happens in blue cities and blue states, we can see it's the Democrats who caused the problem. If places with unchecked Democrat control are the most bankrupt and crime-ridden of all, well, by gosh and by golly, it must be the Democrat policies that are to blame. As for other kinds of blame, if 1,000 Democrats do thing X and 2 Republicans also do thing X, the headline is, Republicans have a problem with thing X. Bad things that all Democrats and 1 Republican voted for are somehow not Democrat bills, but bipartisan. And then there's the slanted way they cover political violence. Note, for example, their double standards about riots in particular. Namely, there's only 1 riot they've ever condemned. After camouflaging the bias of the Democrats and their pet institutions, sometimes the DNC media even camouflages their own bias by pretending it's a right-wing smear campaign. As though the right wing made them get Russian collusion or Covington Catholic wrong, because we totally made them do that. Yeah, numerical camouflaging builds on regular old camouflaging. This is the fine art of twisting the data. A whole bunch of tricks are employed, but for brevity's sake, the key tricks are 1, measuring the wrong thing in order to help your case. For example, you measure COVID cases to make Florida look bad, but not deaths per capita, which makes New York look bad. Or 2, you cherry pick a time frame you want to get a rise or a drop of the thing you want, and then measure this rise or drop by percents rather than actual numbers. I would recommend counteracting this by getting a whole timeline of the data and then ask, well, why did they pick that start point and that end point? After this section, there's some clarifying facts on various topics, from healthcare to gun control to the way the COVID virus was covered. Basically, in short, the foreign press covered good and bad, not just bad, because they weren't trying to get Orange Man Bad out of office at the time. Also, returning to Florida or New York, as I mentioned before, whenever COVID spiked nationally, we suddenly saw stories about how it was rising in Texas or Florida. And whenever it went back down, we saw stories about how it fell nationally. Now, someone who watched CNN or read the New York Times might be forgiven for thinking that COVID only rises in Texas and Florida and only falls anywhere else. And I got a section about the red state taker canard. Basically, when we recognize that people get welfare checks and not states, and when we ask how said people cast their votes, this whole lie evaporates. Also, Democrats live in states that they tend to live in states that were past Republican development, economic development, before the New Deal made those states rich. And in a country with a progressive income tax system, yes, that leads to them paying more. Let's see. Okay, building on the various forms of camouflaging, we have weaponized unverifiability, whereby experts who shall not be questioned will make assertions of several kinds. First, the DNC press will claim that Republican books or bills contain something that sounds bad but would take lots of digging to disprove. The media's objective is to make claims so time-consuming to check that busy people will take their word for it, such as the claims that the Inspector General Horowitz's report exonerates Comey, and it said in the report, it said Comey lied about 17 different things on FISA applications. Actually, they did this for a while with abortion bills. They say, this abortion bill doesn't have a rape and incest exception. And I'm looking at these stories. I'm like, any Republican who wrote a bill without that would get it struck down instantly. Like, why would they waste their time passing a bill without? And, of course, if you went and looked at the actual bills, which before the internet would have taken a lot of time to dig up, but yeah, they're basically always lying. But anyway, the media's objective is to make claims so time-consuming to check that busy people will take their word for it. This also includes showing out-of-context clips of debates to pretend Democrats won a debate. Another variant of the same idea is the draconian circle technique, which follows a 3-step process. 1, say a huge danger looms. 2, impose tyranny, often with security theater or medical LARPing. And 3, claim your tyranny prevented the unlikely danger. The central idea here is to compare an actual to a hypothetical. Yet another angle of the draconian circle technique is that the regime media, by predicting worse than what happens, enables the repression, while at the same time making people grateful that the dreadful Democrat results weren't worse. So you mess with people's expectations and then cash in. Failing all the above, the DNC press aims to change the topic by suppression, or as I call it, Hunter Bidening the story. They refuse to run the story and then say no one's running the story. And then, no source is running the story. It's not news. It's a conspiracy theory, And anyone non-establishment runs the story. Well, they're not a credible outlet. But, no outlet's running the story, then an outlet runs the story. Well, no credible outlets run the story. You're a conspiracy theorist because, you don't do what the establishment says. So we've got mean names for you. This in turn relies on a cultivated cadre of regime-sponsored experts who dismiss truth as lies, in addition to impact stories about what the mean Republicans hammering home the truth have done to this poor career politician and this poor machine bureaucrats. This card is played quickly after the media's attacking narratives lose traction, so as to attempt to pivot back to another favorite attacking narrative. Boilerplate dismissal buzzwords come out after any story that can't just be Hunter Biden. Buzzwords like racist, alt-right, dog whistles, trolls, Russian bots, debunked, discredited, disproven, no evidence, without evidence, part of the big lie, right-wing talking points, misinformation, conspiracy theories, or but experts say, among many others. These terms will never appear when the media is winning the argument, only when they're losing. These are anti-discussion words or discussion foreclosure words. These often lead into identitizing the dispute and can go hand in hand with rapid-fire misquote stacking to quickly paint the truth exposer as crazy. Panels of so-called experts, who are not experts but actually just liberals, loom large in this tactic, as they do in the aforementioned magnification of the rarities. A stronger brew of this is the everything we can't answer is racist, Nazis, alt-right, Russia, QAnon, whereby the truth exposers are painted as not merely crazy, but dangerous, painted as people who repeat old segregationist or Nazi canards. Conflation runs rampant, assisted by for example, the SPLC and ADL spinning conspiracy theories that every meme they can't deal with and every argument they can't answer somehow has a secret Nazi origin. For example, fierce but fair criticism of George Soros for the ridiculous prosecutors whose campaigns he funded. Not that I'm really that draconian on crime myself, but I mean, come on, we shouldn't be hearing about people with 35 or 40 prior arrests for a serious violent crime still walking the streets. But anyway, the SPLC and ADL and the media they feed talking points to all claim it's anti-Semitic to complain about Mr. Soros. No, it's just like liberals complaining about the Koch brothers. We gripe about each other's donors. There's nothing more to it than that. But in the course of painting us all as Nazis or Russia or QAnon, the tiniest linguistic coincidences are typically spun into something they're not, which is completely unfair because there's only so many words in the English language to describe political events. Someone bad used one of these words once, therefore no one else can ever use that word. Well, actually that's the idea. The SPLC, ADL, and DNC want to deprive good people of the vocabulary required to defeat leftist arguments. If we gather momentum anyway, the DNC media responds by making us the story. In other words, Democrats all pedophiles, Republicans pounce! You've seen enough of these headlines to know what this is, I'm sure. Making us the story includes not only substituting us for the issue, but also assigning made-up imaginary motives to us. A related trick, the fake hypocrisy defense, pretends it's hypocritical for us to drive liberals out of the institutions they hijacked. Miscasting or substitute fake stories is how the DNC media attempts to right the ship. They do this when they can't salvage their situation with the aforementioned camouflaging, when they can't rescue a narrative by inserting another culprit for the problem. Thus, they make a counterclaim that something else is actually the problem. A few examples. Free speech? No, the right wing is saying free speech is a cover for hate and toxic interactions and harassment. How dare people be allowed to debunk me on the internet? Oh no, the internet's flooded with viral misinformation. What? You mean our fake stories that Trump's a racist, mocked a disabled reporter, or colluded with Russia went viral? Oh no. When we say misinformation, we're complaining anyone was allowed to debunk that. Us transing the kids and teaching them the USA was built on slavery isn't the problem. Oh, no. The problem is conservatives are starting a culture war, and this is bad because the kids actually belong to the teachers. And OMG, let's center this coverage on how the argument impacts teachers in their fields. You don't want out of the EU because you're tired of unelected bullies in Brussels. Oh, no. You're trying to leave because Russia. There's no crisis at the border. You only object because you're like David Duke. And oh, look, wait, kids in cages. Harm! Tammany Hall? Daily Machine? What's that? No. The real story is there's voter suppression and it's too hard to vote and the line's too long. Or, my personal favorite, The real problem isn't media bias, but that Reagan repealed the Fairness Doctrine. They're just mad Rush Limbaugh could tell people the media was biased. In other words, the problem is never the problem. The problem is that you noticed. If a narrative unravels this far, the DNC media plays the victim as they go Smolletting. For example, after Jordan Peterson dismantled all the trap questions Kathy Newman laid for him, suddenly she's getting harassment and getting death threats. Only liberals ever get death threats. Funny how that works. And liberals only get death threats after they start losing the argument. Funny how that works. Be very careful and make sure all your friends are really your friends at this point. This stage often precedes attempts to cancel the truth exposers. Goon squatting, the media's final card, is the attempt to cancel the truth exposers, often by opportunistically linking them to violence they had nothing to do with, especially when shilling for transgenderism by claiming the truth teller has caused some sort of vaguely defined harm. Appropriating therapy language to play the victim is a common tactic by those trying to engineer discourse suppression. Such appeals often reference the pyramid of hate, which is basically Herbert Marcuse's repressive tolerance rendered in infographic form. Most of all, they wish to use such pretexts to shut down opposing platforms, without which the dissidents can't be heard, can't wake up the normies, can't organize themselves. As such, they smear and target everything from Gab to BitChute to Odyssey to Substack. They especially fear Substack, because it makes it profitable for the DNC media's more interesting writers to jump ship. So that threatens the media cartel itself. The threat is not just to the ideology, but to the very operating model. And so, consequently, you've seen a whole lot of hit jobs against Substack in the past year or two for a reason. The DNC media is frequently colluding with other Democrat institutions, from calling for or providing cover for politically motivated investigations to shielding the school system from criticism to denying the deep state even exists. Yeah, anonymous sources tell CNN the deep state doesn't exist. Yeah, I mean, they say, oh, that's Wikipedia even has a deep state conspiracy theory page, which really made me laugh. I'm thinking, I was just imagining all the anonymous sources say for like 5 years. I was imagining that. Okay, we'll go with that. Anyway, the media aids Democrat objectives. That, and they collude with cancel culture organizations like Sleeping Giants. That's right, this isn't organic. There's organizations with all these sock puppets and fake mobs. Sleeping Giants, Right Wing Watch, Color of Change, SPLC, Coalition for a Safer Web, Stop Hate for Profit, which is an umbrella consisting of ADL, NAACP, Color of Change, Common Sense Media, and the ironically named Free Press. And then out in there in the ether, there's the old Standby Media Matters, a ridiculous group that said doubters of Jussie Smollett were conspiracy theorists. No, I'm not making that up. Look up, go to any old search engine, look up Media Matters, Twitter's search suggestions promoted right-wing smear attack against Jussie Smollett, and see for yourself. In any case, the important point is that cancel culture is establishment-funded astroturf. I mean, can you think of the last time they tried to cancel anyone that was pro-establishment? Where was the campaign to fire Don Lemon or Brian Stelter, or to get advertisers to stop sponsoring the New York Times? I think I must have missed that. So, cancel culture is class warfare with civil rights rhetoric as the cover story. One way they bully the working class is with these fake-ass fact-checkers. The fact-checkers are funded by rich liberals. And that's not what I say. That's what their IRS 990 forms say. When someone wants their group to be a 501c3 tax-exempt organization, they have to file what's called a Form 990 with the IRS to make it clear they're not, sneakily and actually for-profit business. So as part of this, they have to list their sources of income, their donors. Well, those of us who know what the Tides Foundation is, or the Open Society Foundation, or the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is, we'll have no trouble figuring out these are big lefty donors. So yeah, take these guys with a grain of salt. I'm not saying fact checkers are always wrong, but so many of their fact checks amount to how can we reframe this dispute to make the left-wing person right? They cherry-pick obscure conservative claims circulating in chain emails while leaving bald-faced lies that the DNC media produced unchecked. If they were serious about stopping online misinformation, they would have called Russian collusion just plain fake inside 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, personally, not a humble brag, I figured out it was bunk inside of 48 hours. It never made any sense. I mean, Putin wants the U.S. to be energy independent. Putin wants the U.S. to have a stronger army. Putin wants the U.S. to send natural gas to Western Europe so they don't have to buy from Russia. Putin wants America to pull out of the Iran deal, so that Russia was like a guarantor of, a party to, or whatever. Yeah, I mean they like the Iran deal, and they want Trump to pull out of it. I mean that doesn't make any sense. Anyway, this narrative laundering that is fact checking involves experts who are anything but. Their track record is very unimpressive, from failed COVID predictions to failed claims the Maldives would be submerged 30 years ago. Anything about peak oil. No less than Paul Krugman said the internet would no more impact the economy than the fax machine. Krugman is just like the biggest clown. I don't know how he still has a job. See also the failed 1972 Club of Rome predictions about the limits of growth, or Paul Ehrlichman's population bomb and his failed predictions of catastrophic famines in the 70s and 80s. The next time you hear expert consensus, keep in mind that their track record is really no better than yours. Speaking of terrible track records, the low intelligence community provides all these anonymous sources says stories. They have less than zero credibility right now. The abusively biased academia generates the experts and the fake fact-checker J-school students. Democrats outnumber Republicans on the faculty by a wild margin, from 4.5 times as many in economics to 33.5 times as many in the history and sociology departments. Hence the swath of studies that prove conservatives are racist or authoritarian or Nazis, hence the academic endorsement of the magical switching parties conspiracy theory. And as the grievance studies affairs proves, the Academy's whatever past self-corrective ability it had, that's broken. It's broken by wokeness. People have been woke-timidated from telling the truth. Abusively biased big tech sits downstream from academia's bias. They then impose wokeness on everyone's communications. Their weirdo-imposed norms, their freak show values are imposed on us. They do their best to demote, downrank, and bury content that debunks Democrats. Richard Epstein exposed this, as well as Google whistleblower Zach Voorhees. If memory serves, Google is also the screwy company that fired James Damore for saying men and women were different. Wikipedia bias is the product of academic smears and big tech bias. Liberal edit mobs dominate Wikipedia, which is important because so many search engines all but default to Wikipedia. So it matters that the edit mobs have decided only establishment media sources count as credible. It's kind of like what identitizing does to earlier conflicts between Republican and Democrat politicians. This whole credible sources, basically, if credible sources means got Russian collusion wrong, essentially. But this whole policy transforms arguments over what is true into discussions of who is true. And in doing so, they massively distort what actually happened, especially with things like Biden or Ukraine or Burisma, or what happened with Russian collusion hoaxes or Spygates or deep states. Finally, deplatforming. I document a history of deplatforming in this work, which deplatforming started in the 1830s. Or, if the parties switched, then why do Democrats still act the same? From deplatforming abolitionists, banning their literature from the mails, organizing mobs to smash their printing presses, and blaming the press, the abolitionist press, for the Nat Turner slave rebellion, from getting 1890s Southern populists fired for not voting straight-ticket Democrat, from Woodrow Wilson jailing his critics and banning anti-war literature from the mail, FDR using the FCC to threaten to yank broadcast licenses from New Deal critics, to the Democrat segregationists in the 50s threatening civil rights supporters' jobs, pressuring banks to not give them loans, the employment of violence and backing up all the same. Democrats have been canceling their critics for their entire existence. True, Herbert Marcuse's Repressive Tolerance, 1965, gave them a book of clever excuses for this behavior that would pass muster in the modern era, but the thuggish tactics of non-producer narcissism date back a long time. Today's woke racketeering is but the latest manifestation. I recommend you get your state governments to modify your state-level civil rights statutes by adding political affiliation and constitutionally protected political activity to protective classes, complete with a hefty penalty for woke businesses refusing to serve conservatives. Like, oh, I don't know, if someone proves you discriminated against them on the basis of politics, your business loses its license to operate in the state. You see, with that kind of a penalty, it doesn't matter how much ESG money is propping them up if they have to help them deal with these itty-bitty fines. Now they have to choose between serving customers or serving the DNC. And as much as there's many woke jokes willing to inflict pain on behalf of wokeness, I very much doubt there's any of them willing to suffer for it. It's pseudo-religious in nature, but it's got people willing to make others martyrs, but I don't think they have anyone willing to be a martyr. I can't see it becoming the new Christianity or the new Islam if it doesn't get to control the levers of power as it presently does. Anyway, read this old book in full. There's so much of note I didn't get to here, but go to narrativebusters.org, and for free you can download it's called the DNC Media's Playbook, or Everything We Can't Answer is Racist, Nazis, Alt-Right, Russia, QAnon Spreads Hate, Incites Violence. There's so much more detail I didn't get to here, but you will find its predictive power rather uncanny. I hope you download it, and I hope you read it, and hope you enjoy it and find it useful. That is all.